The ancient John Deere tractor sputtered its last breath as smoke billowed from beneath its sun-faded hood. Like everything else on this forgotten patch of Missouri soil, it was dying slowly, stubbornly, with a dignity that modern things lacked. The man wiped 65 years of calluses across his weathered face and gazed across fields that had borne his family's name for 4 generations. Foreclosure notices didn't care about history. Banks didn't bargain with drought, and sons who'd fled to glass towers in faraway cities didn't answer calls when the land that shaped them started washing away. Some debts can't be paid with money, some losses cut deeper than property lines, and some strangers, the ones who arrive unexpectedly in the current of a flooded creek, change everything. In 60 days, this land would belong to someone else, unless fate, in its twisted mercy, had finally sent a miracle disguised as disaster. Jackson Harmon squinted against the morning sun as it broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across his waterlogged fields. The rains had finally stopped after 3 days of relentless downpour, but Maple Creek had swollen beyond its banks, threatening the eastern edge of his cornfields. At 65, his body protested every movement with a symphony of creaks and pops, reminders of decades of physical labor and the shrapnel still embedded in his left leg, souvenirs from a jungle half a world away and half a lifetime ago. Damn flood control shot to hell, he muttered, surveying the damaged earthen dam that had protected his fields for nearly 40 years. The muddy water churned angrily around the breach, widening it with each passing minute. If he didn't shore it up soon, he'd lose another 10 acres to erosion. Jackson maneuvered his ancient Ford pickup as close as he dared to the creek's edge and began unloading sandbags he'd prepared before dawn. His weathered hands, mapped with calluses and age spots, worked with practiced efficiency despite the arthritis that had settled into his joints like unwelcome tenants. The sky above had cleared to a perfect Missouri blue, deceptively peaceful after the violence of the storm. He was halfway through the task when he heard a sound that didn't belong among the rural symphony of flowing water and morning birdsong. The distinctive crunch of metal against rock, followed by the unmistakable revving of an engine pushed beyond its capabilities. Jackson straightened, scanning the creek upstream. Through the screen of willows about 70 yards up, he spotted it, the glint of sunlight on metal where no metal should be. A car, no. An SUV had somehow veered off the county road that paralleled the creek and now sat partially submerged in the swollen waters. As he watched, the vehicle slipped further, rotating slowly in the current. "Christ almighty," Jackson muttered, dropping the sandbag he'd been holding. Instinct took over before conscious thought could form. He sprinted toward the vehicle, his bad leg protesting with each impact but adrenaline overriding the pain. As he ran, he stripped off his heavy work jacket, years of rescue training during his military service flooding back with crystal clarity. The SUV was a late-model Subaru, dark blue and already half submerged. Through the driver's side window, Jackson could make out a single occupant, a woman with dark hair streaked with silver, slumped against the steering wheel. Whether unconscious or merely stunned, he couldn't tell, but the vehicle was sinking deeper with each passing second. "Hey, can you hear me?" he shouted, wading into the frigid water. The current, much stronger than it appeared from the shore, immediately pulled at his legs. The creek bed was treacherous, strewn with hidden obstacles and sudden drop-offs. One misstep could put him under the muddy water, but Jackson moved with the confidence of a man who had navigated this waterway since childhood. The woman didn't respond. The water had now reached the bottom of the windows, and the current was pushing the vehicle toward deeper water. Jackson reached the driver's side door and tried the handle. Locked. He pounded on the window. "Ma'am, wake up. You need to unlock the door." The woman stirred slightly but didn't respond coherently. A thin trickle of blood ran from a gash on her forehead. She'd likely hit the steering wheel before the airbag deployed. The airbag itself had already deflated, leaving her vulnerable to the rising water. Jackson didn't hesitate. He pulled himself onto the hood of the sinking vehicle, reached into his back pocket for his pocket knife, and moved toward the sunroof. To his relief, it was partially open, perhaps an automatic response to the crash. He wedged his fingers into the gap and pulled with all his strength. The glass panel slid back with a mechanical groan. "Hold on! I'm coming in!" he called, though he doubted the woman could hear him. He lowered himself through the opening. Water already ankle-deep inside the vehicle. The interior smelled of wet leather, deployed airbag chemicals, and the metallic tang of blood. "Ma'am, I'm going to get you out of here," he said, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. The woman moaned softly as Jackson reached across to release her seatbelt. Her eyes fluttered open, briefly dark eyes, disoriented but intelligent before closing again. Jackson quickly assessed her condition. The head wound was bleeding but didn't appear life-threatening. More concerning was the way her left arm hung at an unnatural angle, likely broken or dislocated. He needed to move her without causing further injury. But the rising water left no time for caution. "Sorry about this," he murmured, sliding one arm behind her back and another under her knees. With a grunt of effort, he lifted her from the seat. She was lighter than he expected, but his back protested nonetheless. Maneuvering back through the sunroof would be impossible with her in his arms. Water now reached his waist. The vehicle shifted ominously beneath him, the current pulling it inexorably toward the main channel. Jackson kicked at the driver's side window with all his strength. Once, twice on the third impact. The safety glass shattered, collapsing in a sheet of fractured cubes. He turned to shield the woman from the broken glass and maneuvered her through the opening, trying to keep her injured arms stabilized against his chest. The current immediately grabbed them, threatening to pull them under. Jackson planted his feet firmly against the submerged door frame and pushed off, propelling them away from the sinking vehicle. The frigid water shocked his system, but decades of swimming in this creek had prepared him for its temperament. He kept the woman's head above water with one arm, while using the other to navigate toward the shore, working with the current rather than fighting it directly. His boots found purchase on the muddy bank, and he dragged himself and his burden onto solid ground. The woman remained unconscious, her breathing shallow. Jackson laid her gently on a relatively dry patch of grass and immediately checked her vital signs. Pulse present, but weak. Breathing labored. "Hang in there," he said, pulling his cell phone from his pocket. Unsurprisingly, the screen remained dark, dead from water damage. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and the landline at his farmhouse was another half-mile upstream. The woman's condition didn't allow for that kind of delay. Jackson placed 2 fingers on the side of her neck, monitoring her pulse while mentally calculating his options. The pulse suddenly weakened, then disappeared entirely. Without hesitation, Jackson tilted her head back, ensuring her airway was clear, and began chest compressions. His training from decades earlier took over 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths. Repeat. "Don't you die on my land, lady," he grunted between compressions. "Haven't filled out that kind of paperwork in years, and I'm not starting today." After what seemed like an eternity, but was likely less than 2 minutes, the woman gasped, coughing up creek water. Jackson gently turned her onto her side, allowing her to clear her airway. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing dark irises clouded with confusion. Where?" she managed before another coughing fit overtook her. "You're safe," Jackson said simply. "Your car went into Maple Creek. You're on my property, Harmon Ridge Farm." The woman tried to sit up but winced as pain shot through her injured arm. "My arm. Likely broken. Try not to move it." Jackson removed his flannel shirt, leaving him in a faded thermal undershirt, and draped it over her. "Ambulance would take at least 40 minutes to get here from Riverdale. My truck's just up the way. Think you can walk if I help you?" She nodded weakly, and Jackson helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight. "I'm Jackson Harmon," he said as they began the slow trek toward his pickup. "Sarah," the woman replied through gritted teeth. "Sarah Mitchell," Jackson nodded, focusing on navigating the muddy terrain. "Well, Ms. Mitchell, you picked one hell of a spot for a drive." A weak smile flickered across her pale face. "Not exactly. By choice." She stumbled, and Jackson tightened his grip around her waist. The road just disappeared in the rain. Flash floods take out that county road almost every spring. Jackson explained. Highway Department keeps promising to raise it, but they've been promising that since Nixon was president. They reached the truck, and Jackson helped Sarah into the passenger seat, careful of her injured arm. The ancient Ford protested with a wheezing cough before the engine caught. Jackson cranked the heater to full blast and pulled a worn wool blanket from behind the seat, tucking it around Sarah. Hospitals in Riverdale, about 20 miles, he explained, putting the truck in gear. But the bridge might still be flooded. If it is, we'll have to take the long way around, add another 40 minutes. Sarah nodded, her teeth chattering despite the heater. Thank you, she managed. You saved my life. Jackson kept his eyes on the rutted farm road. Anyone would have done the same. No, Sarah said with surprising firmness. They wouldn't have. Jackson glanced at her, seeing something in her eyes beyond pain and gratitude, a sharp intelligence assessing him. He shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. You military? She asked unexpectedly. Jackson raised an eyebrow. Long time ago. How'd you figure? The way you handled the situation. Methodical. The rescue breathing technique, they've updated protocols since Vietnam. Hard to keep up with the latest when you don't use it much, Jackson replied dryly. Been a while since I pulled someone from Maple Creek. As they approached the main road, Jackson's prediction proved correct. Water still covered the low-lying bridge, making it impassable. He swore under his breath and turned the truck around. Looks like we're taking the scenic route, he said. There's a thermos of coffee in the glove compartment if you want it. Might help with the chill. Sarah reached for the thermos with her good arm, her movements revealing a large watch that Jackson recognized as far more expensive than it appeared at first glance, the kind of understated luxury that wealthy people preferred. You're not from around here, Jackson observed. Not a question. No, Sarah admitted. I'm from Boston originally. I've been staying in Riverdale for a few weeks, doing research. Research? Jackson navigated around a massive pothole. Riverdale's not exactly known for its libraries. A small smile played at the corners of Sarah's mouth despite her pain. I'm a writer. I'm working on a book about changing rural landscapes. Sounds thrilling, Jackson said flatly. Sarah's smile widened slightly. It has its moments, though nearly drowning wasn't part of my research plan. They lapsed into silence as Jackson concentrated on the challenging road conditions. Several times they had to detour around flooded sections or debris left by the storm. Sarah occasionally winced when the truck hit particularly rough patches, but she made no complaints. After nearly an hour of tortuous progress, they finally reached the outskirts of Riverdale, a town of just under 10,000 residents that served as the county seat. The small regional hospital sat on a hill at the east end of town, its bland brick facade a welcome sight. Jackson pulled up to the emergency entrance and helped Sarah from the truck. A nurse with a clipboard met them at the door, quickly assessing the situation. Car accident, Jackson explained. Possible concussion. Definitely a broken arm. She was unconscious when I found her. Went into cardiac arrest briefly at the scene. The nurse raised her eyebrows at his clinical assessment. Are you a paramedic, sir? No, ma'am. Just old. The nurse's professional demeanor cracked slightly with a smile. Well, we'll take good care of her. You, her husband. No, Sarah interjected. Mr. Harmon pulled me from my car after I drove into a creek. We're strangers. The nurse nodded, making notes. We'll need some information from both of you. Jackson shifted awkwardly. I should get back to my farm. Creek took out part of my flood control, and I've got livestock to check on. The nurse looked up from her clipboard. We'll still need a statement for the accident report. Mr. Harmon, shouldn't take more than 30 minutes. Jackson sighed, resigned. Fine, but I need to make a call first. My landline's probably out after the storm, and my cell's dead. While Sarah was wheeled away for examination, Jackson used the hospital phone to call his neighbor, Bill Thurman, asking him to check on the cattle in the south pasture. By the time he finished the call and the necessary paperwork, an hour had passed. He was preparing to leave when a doctor approached him in the waiting room. Mr. Harmon, I'm Dr. Winters. I wanted to thank you personally for your quick action today. Ms. Mitchell suffered a clean break to her radius and a mild concussion, but your CPR at the scene likely prevented oxygen deprivation that could have caused serious brain damage. Jackson nodded uncomfortably. Just did what needed doing. Well, it made all the difference. She's asking to see you before you leave. Jackson hesitated, then followed the doctor to a curtained examination area. Sarah sat on the edge of a hospital bed, her arm now properly set in a cast. The blood had been cleaned from her face, revealing an elegant woman perhaps in her late 50s, with striking features and intelligent eyes. She'd been given hospital scrubs to replace her wet clothes. "My knight in muddy armor," she said with a small smile. "They tell me I owe you my life." Jackson shrugged. "Glad you're all right. Miss Mitchell, I should be getting back to my farm." "Of course." Sarah seemed to study him for a moment. "But I insist on properly thanking you. Perhaps I could take you to dinner once I'm discharged." "Not necessary," Jackson said, already backing toward the door. "Just glad you're okay." "At least let me replace your shirt," Sarah persisted, gesturing to his thermal undershirt. "And I'll need to arrange to retrieve whatever might be salvageable from my car." Jackson sighed. "Creek probably carried your car half a mile downstream by now. As for the shirt, don't worry about it. Got plenty." Dr. Winters interjected. "Miss Mitchell, we'd like to keep you overnight for observation, given the concussion and the cardiac event." Sarah nodded. "Of course. Doctor," she turned back to Jackson. "Mr. Harmon, would you at least leave your contact information? The insurance company will need details about the accident location." Recognizing a losing battle, Jackson scribbled his landline number on a hospital notepad. "Phone might be out for a day or two after the storm, but you can leave a message." With that, he nodded a curt goodbye and escaped the antiseptic confines of the hospital. The afternoon sun hung low in the western sky by the time Jackson returned to the spot where he'd abandoned his flood control efforts. The breach had widened considerably, and water now flowed freely across the eastern corner of his cornfield. Too late to save those acres now. With a resigned sigh, he collected his scattered tools and the unused sandbags. Some battles couldn't be won, a lesson he'd learned in Vietnam and relearned countless times since. He'd replant what he could, adjust, and move forward. It was the only way he knew. As darkness fell, Jackson sat on his porch with a glass of bourbon, watching lightning flicker on the distant horizon, another storm system approaching. The weather radio beside him crackled with warnings of additional rainfall expected overnight. His ancient farmhouse creaked and settled around him, its familiar sounds a comfort after the day's chaos. His thoughts drifted to the woman he'd pulled from the creek. There had been something familiar about her, though he couldn't place it. Sarah Mitchell. The name tickled at his memory, but the connection remained elusive. Jackson's gaze wandered to the pile of mail on the side table bills mostly, each one a reminder of his precarious financial situation. The foreclosure notice from Riverdale Community Bank had arrived last week, giving him 60 days to bring his mortgage current or face auction. After 3 consecutive years of drought followed by this spring's excessive rainfall, the margins that had always been thin had disappeared entirely. He picked up the bourbon bottle, contemplating a refill, then set it down untouched. Clear heads made better decisions, and he needed every functioning brain cell to figure a way out of this mess. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd saved a stranger's life today, but he couldn't save the land that had been in his family for 4 generations. The telephone's shrill ring pierced the evening quiet, startling Jackson from his thoughts. Few people called the landline anymore. Most of his business was conducted in person or not at all. "Harmon," he answered, his voice gruff from bourbon and fatigue. "Mr. Harmon, it's Rebecca Marshall from Riverdale Community Bank." Jackson's grip tightened on the receiver. Rebecca had been 2 years behind him in high school, a bright, ambitious girl who'd gone away to college and returned with accounting credentials and a determination to modernize the sleepy local bank. Now she held his financial fate in her professionally manicured hands. "Rebecca," he acknowledged. Bit late for bank business, isn't it? This isn't an official call, Jackson, she said, her tone softening. I heard about what happened today. Small town. News travels fast. I wanted to check if you were okay. Jackson snorted. I'm not the one who drove into a creek. No, but you're the one who jumped into floodwaters to save a stranger. At your age, with your leg. I'm fine, he interrupted. Woman's alive. That's what matters. A pause on the line. Do you know who she is? Jackson said her name's Sarah Mitchell. Writer of some kind. Rebecca's laugh held a note of disbelief. Not just any writer. Sarah Mitchell is one of the most successful authors in the country right now. Her Heartland series has sold millions of copies. There was even talk of a movie deal for her last book. Jackson frowned. Never heard of her. You wouldn't have, Rebecca acknowledged. You haven't exactly kept up with the bestseller lists. But trust me, you just saved a very influential person. Doesn't change anything, Jackson said flatly. Still got a farm washing away and a bank looking to take what's left? Rebecca sighed. That's actually the other reason I'm calling. I've been reviewing your file, and I think there might be options we haven't explored. The bank's new corporate owners are pushing for quick resolutions on delinquent mortgages, but I've convinced them to give me 2 weeks to explore alternatives for several long-standing customers, including you. What kind of alternatives? Jackson asked, suspicion evident in his tone. I'd rather discuss that in person. Could you come by the bank tomorrow afternoon? Jackson considered the request. Got to finish shoring up that dam and check fencing in the south pasture. Could make it by 4. 4 works, Rebecca confirmed. And Jackson, I'm trying to help. I remember what your family's farm meant to this community when I was growing up. Not everything is about the bottom line. After they hung up, Jackson stared at the phone for a long moment. Rebecca's call had awakened a dangerous emotion he'd worked hard to suppress. Hope. Hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not after watching drought destroy his crops 3 years running. Not after holding Eleanor's hand as cancer stole her away inch by inch. Not after Michael had walked away from both the farm and his father without looking back. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Jackson gathered his glass and the bottle and headed inside, latching the screen door against the coming storm. As he moved through the darkened house toward his bedroom, he passed the closed door that had once been Michael's room, then Eleanor's sewing room, and was now simply another space filled with memories too painful to revisit. In his Spartan bedroom, Jackson placed his wallet and keys on the dresser. Noticing the framed photograph that had stood in the same spot for decades, himself and Eleanor, on their wedding day. Young and impossibly optimistic, the future stretching before them like the endless Missouri sky. Beside it stood a smaller frame holding a faded photograph of a teenage Michael in FFA blues, proudly displaying a prize heifer at the county fair. Quite a day, Ellie, he murmured to the empty room. Pulled a famous author from Maple Creek. Would have made a good story for your quilting circle. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by the storm's fury and dreams of murky water closing over his head, the weight of a stranger in his arms pulling him down into darkness. He woke before dawn, as he had nearly every day of his adult life, his body attuned to the rhythm of farm work regardless of the weather or his need for rest. The new day brought clear skies but additional challenges. The storm had damaged fencing in the west pasture, allowing 3 of his beef cattle to wander dangerously close to the state highway. Jackson spent the morning rounding up the escaped animals and repairing the fence, his arthritic hands protesting every swing of the hammer. By early afternoon, he'd managed to shore up the damaged dam with the remaining sandbags, though he knew it was at best a temporary solution. A proper repair would require equipment he could no longer afford to rent and materials that stretched beyond his dwindling resources. The ancient John Deere tractor that had belonged to his father sputtered ominously as Jackson used it to haul debris from the fields. The machine had been reliable for decades, but parts were increasingly difficult to find, and the local mechanic had warned him during the last repair that the engine might not survive another major issue. Just hold together a little longer, old girl, Jackson muttered. patting the sun-faded green hood. "We'll get through this season somehow." As he guided the tractor back toward the equipment barn, Jackson noticed an unfamiliar vehicle coming up his long gravel driveway, a rental car by the looks of it, its pristine white exterior out of place against the muddy rural backdrop. He frowned, not expecting visitors and generally not welcoming of unannounced ones. The car stopped near the farmhouse, and Jackson watched with surprise as Sarah Mitchell emerged from the driver's side, her left arm in a sling, but otherwise appearing remarkably recovered from the previous day's ordeal. She wore simple jeans and a button-down shirt, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She scanned the property until she spotted him on the tractor, then raised her good arm in greeting. Jackson sighed, directing the tractor toward the house. He'd hoped to avoid further interaction with the woman. Gratitude made people awkward, and he had neither the time nor the inclination for social niceties. "Ms. Mitchell," he acknowledged as he cut the tractor's engine. "Should you be driving with that arm?" Sarah smiled, the expression transforming her serious face. "It's my left arm. Fortunately, I'm right-handed. And the doctor cleared me this morning, though he wasn't thrilled about it." Jackson climbed down from the tractor, wiping his hands on a rag from his back pocket. "What brings you out here? Your car's probably halfway to the Mississippi by now." Actually, the sheriff's department located it about a quarter-mile downstream, wedged against a fallen tree. They're arranging to have it towed once the creek level drops further. She hesitated and then added, "But that's not why I'm here. I wanted to thank you properly for saving my life." Jackson shrugged uncomfortably. "Already said it wasn't necessary." Nevertheless, Sarah reached into the rental car and retrieved a package wrapped in simple brown paper. "A replacement for the shirt you sacrificed in my rescue." Jackson accepted the package reluctantly. "Wasn't necessary, but thank you." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the rhythmic creaking of the windmill that had pumped water on the Harmon farm for generations. "Your farm is beautiful," Sarah said finally, gesturing toward the rolling fields that stretched toward the distant tree line. "How long has it been in your family?" "4 generations," Jackson replied, something in her genuine interest prompting a more detailed response than he'd intended. "My great-grandfather homesteaded the original 100 acres after the Civil War. My grandfather expanded it during the 20s, before the Depression hit. Been trying to hold on to it ever since." Sarah nodded, her gaze taking in the weathered barn, the equipment shed with its sagging roof, the ancient windmill, and the faded white farmhouse. To Jackson's surprise, her eyes held appreciation rather than pity. "It's becoming rare," she observed. "Family farms with this kind of history. Most have been absorbed by corporate agriculture." Jackson studied her with newfound interest. "You really are researching rural landscapes." A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Did you think I was making it up? Wouldn't be the first time someone from the city claimed interest in farming without knowing wheat from barley." Sarah laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Fair enough. I grew up in rural Massachusetts before it became Boston suburbs. My father had an orchard, apples mostly, some peaches, nothing on this scale, but enough that I know the difference between hard work and hobby farming." Before Jackson could respond, a loud backfire from the direction of the equipment barn interrupted the conversation. Smoke began rising from the ancient tractor's engine compartment. "Damn it," Jackson muttered, already moving toward the machine. Sarah followed without invitation, maintaining a respectful distance as Jackson examined the smoking engine. "Fuel lines shot," he diagnosed grimly, just as flames began licking around the engine block. "Get back," he shouted, looking around frantically for something to extinguish the growing fire. Sarah was already moving toward the nearby rain barrel, grabbing a bucket hanging on its rim. Despite her injured arm, she managed to fill the bucket and carry it toward the tractor, sloshing water over the sides with her awkward gait. Jackson took the bucket from her and doused the flames, then repeated the process with a second bucket she'd filled. The fire sputtered and died, leaving behind the acrid smell of burned rubber and fuel. "That was quick thinking." Jackson acknowledged, wiping sweat from his brow. Not my first equipment fire, Sarah replied with a shrug. Our tractor was even older than yours. Dad used to say it was held together with baling wire and prayers. Jackson found himself smiling despite the setback. Sounds familiar. He surveyed the damaged tractor with a grim expression. Though I think this old girl's finally given up the ghost. Can it be repaired? Jackson shook his head. Parts haven't been manufactured in 30 years. Been cannibalizing from other old tractors whenever Sam over at the salvage yard finds one. But this, he gestured to the charred engine. This would take a miracle or money. Got a shortage of both these days. Sarah seemed to hesitate, then spoke carefully. I hope you don't find this presumptuous, but I'd like to help. As a thank you for saving my life. Jackson's expression hardened immediately. Don't need charity, Miss Mitchell? It's not charity, she countered. It's a fair exchange. My life for a tractor part seems like a bargain. Honestly. Appreciate the thought, but no. Jackson's tone left no room for argument. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to see if any of this can be salvaged before my appointment in town. Sarah nodded, recognizing the dismissal. Of course, but Mr. Harmon. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. If you change your mind, or if you'd be willing to talk more about your farm for my research, please call. I'm staying at the Riverdale Inn for the next few weeks. Jackson accepted the card with reluctance, tucking it into his shirt pocket without looking at it. Safe drive back to town, Ms. Mitchell. He watched as she returned to her rental car, his expression unreadable. Only when the vehicle had disappeared down the long driveway did he allow his shoulders to slump. The tractor was beyond repair. He knew it without needing a mechanic's confirmation. Without it, keeping the farm operational became nearly impossible. Even if Rebecca had found some financial solution to the mortgage problem, equipment failure might render the point moot. With a heavy sigh, Jackson headed to the house to clean up before his meeting at the bank. As he showered away the day's grime, his thoughts returned to Sarah Mitchell. There was something genuine about her interest in his farm, something beyond mere politeness or guilt-driven gratitude. In another lifetime, under different circumstances, he might have welcomed the conversation with an educated woman who understood rural life. But circumstances weren't different, and Jackson had long ago given up on changing his stars. The best he could hope for was to delay the inevitable long enough to end his days on the land that had defined his family for generations. Dressed in his least worn pair of jeans and a button-down shirt reserved for church and bank meetings, Jackson headed into town. The drive gave him time to organize his thoughts, to prepare arguments for why Riverdale Community Bank should extend his mortgage yet again, despite 3 years of poor harvests and diminishing returns. The bank occupied a stately brick building on Riverdale's main street, its architecture harkening back to more prosperous times when local financial institutions were pillars of their communities, rather than outposts of distant corporations. Jackson parked his mud-splattered pickup among the newer, cleaner vehicles that belonged to bank employees and customers with better financial prospects. Rebecca met him in the lobby, professional in a tailored suit, but with the warmth in her eyes that had made her popular in high school. Jackson, right on time, come back to my office. He followed her through the bank's interior, nodding to several employees he recognized from church or community events. Rebecca's office was larger than he expected, with windows overlooking the town square and walls adorned with her accounting, credentials, and community service awards. Have a seat, she invited, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from her desk. Can I get you coffee? I'm fine, Jackson replied, sitting stiffly. What's this about? Rebecca, you said you had alternatives to discuss. Rebecca took her seat, adjusting a stack of folders on her desk. Always direct. Jackson, I've always appreciated that about you. She opened the top folder, which Jackson recognized as his loan file. As you know, when Mid-American Financial Partners acquired our bank last year, they implemented more aggressive policies regarding delinquent mortgages, particularly agricultural loans in regions they've designated as high risk due to climate volatility. Cut to the chase, Jackson said, his patience already wearing thin. Are they foreclosing or not? Rebecca sighed. The foreclosure is proceeding as scheduled unless we find an alternative. You're 60 days from auction, but I've been reviewing your property records, and there might be an option worth exploring. She pulled out a survey map of his property. Your farm sits on 300 acres, correct? Jackson nodded, and she continued. The original homestead portion, which includes Maple Creek and the natural spring, is approximately 50 acres. The rest was acquired in separate parcels over the years. Jackson's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? A partial sale, Rebecca said carefully. The southeastern portion of your property, about 80 acres bordering the state conservation land, has attracted interest from developers looking to build vacation properties. The location near the conservation area makes it particularly valuable. A sale could generate enough capital to clear your mortgage debt and leave you with the historic homestead and enough acreage to maintain a smaller operation. Jackson stared at her, his expression hardening. You want me to sell off part of my heritage to developers who'll put up weekend cabins for city folks? I'm presenting options, Jackson, Rebecca replied evenly. The alternative is losing all of it in 60 days. Jackson stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. My grandfather bought that parcel in 1926, worked 2 jobs to make the payments through the Depression. My father expanded the irrigation to make it productive. I'm not carving up the farm like a Thanksgiving turkey for some developer to build playhouses for tourists. Rebecca remained seated, her expression sympathetic but firm. I understand your emotional attachment, Jackson, but this isn't just about history, it's about survival. Partial adaptation is better than complete loss. Is that what they teach in business school these days? Jackson's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. Dress up, surrender as adaptation. Jackson, please. No, Rebecca. I appreciate you trying to help, but this isn't help. It's surrender with a prettier name. He moved toward the door, then paused. My family didn't survive dust storms, depression, and war by selling off pieces of themselves. I'll find another way. Rebecca stood, concern evident in her expression. There is no other way, Jackson. Not with the timeline we're facing. Please, at least think about it. Talk to Michael. Leave my son out of this, Jackson snapped, his hand tightening on the doorknob. He made his choice a long time ago. He's still your family, Rebecca persisted. And the farm is his heritage too, whether he wants it or not. Jackson didn't respond, pulling the door open with more force than necessary. As he strode through the bank lobby, his mind raced with a toxic mixture of anger, pride, and increasingly desperate calculation. Rebecca's suggestion made logical sense. He knew that even through his emotional rejection, selling a portion to save the core might be the only mathematical solution. But farms weren't math problems. They were living entities, ecosystems of their own, where each acre played a role in the delicate balance that had sustained generations. His father and grandfather would never have considered such a compromise. Lost in thought, Jackson nearly collided with someone entering the bank as he exited. He mumbled an apology without looking up, pushing past to reach his truck. Mr. Harmon. The voice stopped him in his tracks. Sarah Mitchell stood on the bank steps, surprise evident in her expression. Is everything all right? Jackson struggled to compose himself. Fine, he managed, though his tone belied the word. Just finishing some business. Sarah studied him with the perceptive gaze he was beginning to recognize as a writer's tool, observing, analyzing, filing away details for future use. Bad news from the bank, she asked gently. Something in her tone, free of pity but rich with genuine concern, broke through his defenses. You could say that, he admitted. Turns out saving the farm might mean selling off pieces of it. Not much of a victory. Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes. The foreclosure process has started. Jackson's eyebrows rose in surprise. How did you? I've been researching agricultural economics for my book. Sarah explained. The pattern is depressingly common across the Midwest. Banks that were once locally owned get acquired by larger financial institutions. Lending policies change. Family farms that weathered previous hardships suddenly find themselves unable to secure the extensions they need to survive temporary setbacks. Jackson stared at her, momentarily speechless. Her assessment was unnervingly accurate. "You really are doing research," he said finally. A small smile crossed Sarah's face. "I told you I was—" Her expression grew serious again. "How much time do you have?" 60 days, Jackson replied, surprising himself with his candor. "Unless I come up with around $150,000 to clear the arrears and penalties?" Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "And the bank suggested selling part of the property, 80 acres, to developers who want to build vacation cabins." The disgust was evident in his voice. Before Sarah could respond, a pickup truck pulled into the bank parking lot, stopping abruptly near them. Bill Thurman, Jackson's nearest neighbor, leaned out the window, his expression urgent. "Jackson been trying to reach you. Your phone working. Line still down from the storm. What's wrong? Sheriff called me when he couldn't get you. Spotted some suspicious activity at your place when they were checking the creek. Looks like Delaney's boys might be casing your equipment barn." Jackson swore under his breath. The Delaney brothers had a reputation for stealing farm equipment and machinery parts to sell across state lines. With many farms struggling financially, thefts had increased in recent months. "I need to get back," Jackson said, already moving toward his truck. "I'll follow you," Sarah said decisively, heading toward her rental car. Jackson paused. "This isn't your problem, Ms. Mitchell." Sarah was already opening her car door. "I was on my way to interview you anyway. Might as well get some action scenes for the book." Before Jackson could object further, Bill called out, "Better hurry, Sheriff said they'd try to swing by, but they're dealing with flooding on the north side of the county." With a nod of resignation, Jackson climbed into his pickup. The day that had started with a foreclosure warning was now threatening to include robbery. As he pulled onto the main road with Sarah's rental car following, Jackson couldn't help but think that troubles, like spring storms in Missouri, never seemed to arrive alone. The 15-mile drive back to Harmon Ridge Farm took less than 20 minutes, with Jackson pushing his old truck harder than its worn engine appreciated. Through his rearview mirror, he could see Sarah keeping pace, her expression determined even from a distance. As they turned onto his long gravel driveway, Jackson immediately noticed what had alarmed the sheriff: a battered blue pickup parked partially hidden behind his equipment barn. A vehicle he recognized as belonging to Matt Delaney, the older and marginally smarter of the Delaney brothers. Jackson pulled his truck to a stop 100 yards from the barn, cutting the engine. Sarah parked beside him, rolling down her window with a questioning look. "Stay here," Jackson instructed firmly. "These guys are trouble. Matt's got a temper, and his brother Kevin's not right in the head. If they're stealing, they won't want witnesses." Sarah's expression hardened with stubborn determination. "I'm not sitting in the car while you confront thieves. I was a crime reporter in Boston for 15 years before I started writing books." Before Jackson could protest further, movement near the equipment barn caught his attention. Two figures emerged, carrying what appeared to be parts from his dismantled irrigation pump. The Delaney brothers had made themselves at home, apparently unconcerned about being caught on a property they believed to be unoccupied. "Damn it," Jackson muttered, reaching under his seat and retrieving an old but well-maintained shotgun. He checked that it was loaded, then turned to Sarah. "Stay behind me, at least, and if things go south, get in your car and drive to the Thurman Place First Farm east of here." To his surprise, Sarah nodded agreement, her earlier bravado tempered by the reality of the situation. "Should we call the sheriff?" "No cell service out here, and my landline's down," Jackson replied grimly. "It's just us." They exited their vehicles quietly, with Jackson leading the way toward the barn. The Delaneys, focused on loading their stolen goods, hadn't noticed their arrival. Jackson raised the shotgun to his shoulder as they approached. "That's far enough. Matt," he called out, his voice carrying across the farmyard. The Delaney brothers froze, then slowly turned to face him. Matt, a beefy man in his 40s with a perpetual scowl, raised his hand slightly. Kevin, younger and wirier, with the nervous energy of a meth user, let his hand drift toward his waistband. "Keep your hands where I can see them." "Kevin," Jackson warned, adjusting his aim slightly. "I'm too old for a fair fight, which means I won't be giving you one." "Easy, old man," Matt said, his tone falsely conciliatory. "Just collecting some scrap you weren't using. Figured with the foreclosure coming, you wouldn't mind." "News travels fast," Jackson remarked dryly. "But last I checked, the property's still mine for at least 60 more days. And that irrigation pump you're stealing is very much in use." Kevin's eyes darted nervously between Jackson and Sarah, clearly trying to assess the threat level. "Who's the lady, your girlfriend?" He snickered, revealing meth-ravaged teeth. "I'm his biographer," Sarah replied smoothly, stepping forward despite Jackson's warning glance. "I'm documenting Mr. Harmon's life, including this charming interaction. I have excellent recall for faces and details. The police find that very helpful." Matt's expression darkened. "Listen, Harmon, we don't want trouble. We'll put the stuff back and be on our way." "You'll put it back." "All right," Jackson agreed. "Then you'll fix what you broke, and then you'll get off my land and stay off." Kevin laughed, a high, unsettling sound. "Or what? Old man, you gonna shoot us both? Sheriff won't like that much." "He won't have to shoot you," came a new voice from behind them. All four turned to see Sheriff Tom Danvers approaching on foot from the far side of the barn, his deputy following close behind. "But I'll be happy to arrest you both for trespassing and theft." The Delaney brothers deflated visibly at the sight of law enforcement. Matt kicked at the dirt in frustration, while Kevin's nervous energy increased, his hands twitching at his sides. "Settle down, Kevin," the sheriff warned. "Don't make this worse than it already is." As the deputy handcuffed the Delaneys, Sheriff Danvers approached Jackson, who had lowered his shotgun. "Neighbor called it in," the sheriff explained. "Said you might need backup. Good thing, too, these boys had a van waiting down by the creek access road, already loaded with equipment from the Petersons' place." Jackson nodded his thanks. "Appreciate the response. Tom, didn't expect you to make it out with the flooding issues. Deputy Ramirez is handling the north side." The sheriff glanced curiously at Sarah. "Ma'am, I don't believe we've met." "Sarah Mitchell," she introduced herself, extending her hand. "I'm a writer doing research in the area. Mr. Harmon has been kind enough to allow me to interview him about his farm." Recognition flickered in the sheriff's eyes. "The author? My wife loves your books. She's got the whole Heartland series on her bedside table." Sarah smiled graciously. "That's very kind. Please tell her I appreciate her support." While the deputy led the Delaney brothers to the patrol car, Sheriff Danvers turned back to Jackson. "You'll need to come by the station tomorrow to file a formal complaint. And Jackson, I heard about the bank situation. I'm sorry." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Nothing's decided yet, Tom." The sheriff nodded, though his expression remained sympathetic. "Still, if there's anything Martha and I can do—" "Appreciate it," Jackson said curtly, "but I'll manage." After the sheriff departed with the Delaneys in custody, Jackson and Sarah surveyed the damage to the equipment barn. The thieves had partially disassembled the irrigation pump and ransacked several storage containers, leaving tools and parts scattered across the concrete floor. "Vultures don't usually circle until you're dead," Jackson muttered, kneeling to examine a broken valve assembly. Sarah helped him gather the scattered components, careful despite her injured arm. "Is the damage repairable?" Jackson sighed, rubbing his forehead wearily. "Most of it. They didn't get far enough to take anything critical, but it's one more thing that needs fixing with no money to fix it." As they worked to restore order to the barn, the physical labor seemed to loosen something in Jackson, and he found himself explaining the irrigation system to Sarah, how it drew water from both the creek and the natural spring, how his father had designed it to maximize efficiency in drought conditions, how it had sustained the farm through lean years until the current extended dry spell overtaxed its capacity. Sarah listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed her background knowledge of agricultural systems. As evening approached, they had restored most of the equipment to working order, though Jackson noted several components that would need replacement before the system could operate at full capacity. "Thank you for your help," Jackson said as they finished, the acknowledgement coming more easily than he had expected. "You're handy to have around in a crisis," Sarah smiled, wiping grease from her hands with a shop rag. "Two crises in 2 days. You lead an exciting life, Mr. Harmon." "Jackson," he corrected, surprising himself. "If you're going to keep turning up during emergencies, you might as well use my first name." "Jackson, then," Sarah agreed. "And I'm Sarah, not Ms. Mitchell." An awkward silence fell between them, broken when Jackson's stomach rumbled audibly. He realized neither of them had eaten since morning. "I could make some dinner," he offered tentatively. "Nothing fancy, but there's stew in the freezer Eleanor, my late wife, made. Still have some put up from before she passed." Sarah's expression softened. "I'd like that, but only if you'll let me help. One-armed as I am, I can still set a table." As they walked toward the farmhouse in the fading light, Jackson found himself oddly comfortable with this unexpected visitor who had entered his life through a series of unfortunate events. There was something refreshingly direct about Sarah Mitchell, a quality he had always valued but rarely encountered, especially in recent years as his isolation had increased. The farmhouse kitchen, with its worn linoleum floor and dated appliances, had always been the heart of the home. Eleanor had maintained it with care, finding creative ways to update the space on a limited budget. Her touches remained visible in the hand-sewn curtains that framed the windows and the collection of blue willow plates displayed on the open shelves. Jackson moved with practiced efficiency, retrieving a container of stew from the freezer and setting it to warm on the stove. Sarah found plates and silverware in the cupboards, setting the oak table that bore the marks of 4 generations of Harmon family meals. "Your wife had good taste," Sarah observed, gesturing to the kitchen's homey aesthetic. "The house feels loved," Jackson nodded, stirring the thawing stew. "Eleanor could make something out of nothing, had an eye for beauty in ordinary things." He paused and then added, "She passed 5 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry," Sarah said simply. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "Hardest thing I've ever faced," Jackson admitted, surprising himself with his candor. "Harder than Vietnam, harder than the drought years. At least with those, you're fighting something external. With cancer, the enemy's inside the person you love most, and all you can do is watch." Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My husband died 10 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden, not like cancer. Different kind of pain, I suppose, but still leaves a hole that doesn't quite fill in." They ate at the kitchen table, the conversation flowing more easily than Jackson would have expected. Sarah asked about the farm's history, listening attentively as he recounted stories passed down through generations, how his great-grandfather had survived the harsh first winter, how his grandfather had expanded during the prosperous 1920s only to fight to keep the land during the Depression, how his father had modernized operations in the post-war boom. "And your son," Sarah asked carefully, "will he be the 5th generation?" Jackson's expression closed slightly. "Michael chose a different path. Lives in New York now, works in media or advertising, something like that. We don't talk much." "Hannah, may I ask why?" Jackson was silent for a long moment, considering whether to share this piece of his life with a virtual stranger. Yet something about Sarah's direct gaze, free of judgment, invited confidence. "He left for college and never really came back," Jackson began. "Got involved in environmental causes, decided farming was part of the problem, not the solution. We had some heated arguments, said things we shouldn't have." He stared into his coffee cup. "After Eleanor died, he came for the funeral. We tried to talk, but the gap was too wide." He went back to New York, and that was that. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Children often need to reject their parents' world before they can see its value. Sometimes they come back to it. Sometimes they don't. Sounds like you speak from experience. A small smile played at Sarah's lips. My daughter is a corporate attorney in Chicago, about as far from an apple orchard in Massachusetts as you can get. We struggled for years before finding common ground. As they cleared the dinner dishes, Jackson found himself wondering about Sarah's research. The book that had brought her to Riverdale and, through a bizarre twist of fate, to his kitchen table. This book you're writing, he began, drying a plate with methodical care. What's it really about? Sarah leaned against the counter, considering her answer. It's about the changing face of rural America, the economic pressures, the environmental challenges, the loss of generational knowledge. She met his gaze directly. It's about people like you, Jackson, people holding on to a way of life that's being squeezed from all sides. Sounds depressing, Jackson remarked dryly. It could be, Sarah acknowledged, but it's also about resilience, adaptation, finding new ways to preserve what matters while letting go of what doesn't. She hesitated, then added, I've been struggling with it, to be honest. I've interviewed dozens of farmers, visited communities across the Midwest, collected statistics and economic analyses, but something was missing the heart of the story. I suppose. Jackson raised an eyebrow. And nearly drowning in my creek helped you find it. Sarah laughed, the sound warm in the cozy kitchen. In a strange way, maybe it did. There's nothing like a near-death experience to clarify one's purpose. Her expression grew serious. Jackson, would you consider letting me interview you properly for the book Your Family's History? Your experiences, your perspective on what's happening to family farms, it could add tremendous depth to the narrative. Jackson was silent, weighing the request. His natural inclination toward privacy warred with something else, a sense that perhaps his story, his family's story, deserved to be told before it was lost entirely. I'll think about it, he said finally. Can't promise more than that right now. Sarah nodded, accepting the non-commitment. That's fair, and I should get back to town before it gets any later. She gathered her purse and jacket. Thank you for dinner, and for today's excitement. Not quite what I expected when I set out this morning. Jackson walked her to her car. The spring evening cool but pleasant. The nearly full moon cast the farm in silver light, softening its worn edges and highlighting its enduring beauty. As Sarah prepared to leave, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. You know, regardless of what happens with the bank, what you've built here matters. Jackson, the knowledge you carry, the connection to the land, that's something worth preserving, even if the form changes. Before Jackson could respond, the peaceful night was shattered by the sound of breaking glass from the direction of the equipment barn, followed by the unmistakable orange glow of flames. Fire! Jackson shouted, already running toward the barn. Call 911. Sarah reached for her cell phone, but as Jackson had warned earlier, there was no service. Without hesitation, she sprinted after him toward the growing blaze. The equipment barn's side window had been broken, and flames were rapidly spreading across the wooden structure. Through the smoke, Jackson could make out a dark figure running toward the tree line. Someone had deliberately set the fire, likely in retaliation for the Delaney's arrest. The irrigation equipment, Jackson coughed, moving toward the barn door. If it burns. Jackson, wait. Sarah grabbed his arm. It's too dangerous. But Jackson pulled away, his face set with determination. Without that equipment, the farm's finished anyway. Stay back. He disappeared into the smoke-filled barn before Sarah could stop him. Frantic, she looked around for anything that could help fight the fire. She spotted the water pump near the house and ran to it, praying it still worked after the Delaney's tampering. To her relief, the pump engaged when she threw the switch. Sarah grabbed the coiled hose nearby and dragged it toward the barn, fighting against her injured arm and the unwieldy weight of the water-filled hose. Inside the barn, Jackson navigated through blinding smoke, making his way to the critical irrigation controls. The heat was intense, flames already consuming the eastern wall and licking at the roof beams. He located the main control panel and began disconnecting it, knowing it would be impossible to replace if destroyed. His lungs burning. Jackson gathered the essential components in his arms and turned toward the exit, only to find his path blocked by a collapsing roof beam. The ancient timber, weakened by fire, gave way with a thunderous crack, crashing down mere feet from where he stood. Outside, Sarah had managed to direct a stream of water at the barn's entrance, trying to clear a path for Jackson's escape. "Jackson!" she screamed over the roar of the flames. "Where are you?" Through the smoke, she glimpsed movement Jackson, his shirt pulled over his mouth, carrying something bulky in his arms. He was trapped behind the fallen beam, searching for another way out. Sarah directed the hose at the beam, creating a temporary reduction in the flames. "There!" she shouted. "Try now." Jackson saw the opportunity and moved quickly, ducking under the smoldering beam and rushing toward the door. He emerged into the night air, coughing violently, his face blackened with soot but still clutching the irrigation controls. "We need to keep the fire from spreading to the house," he gasped, setting down his precious cargo. Together, they fought the blaze with the single hose, focusing on containing it rather than saving the barn, which was clearly beyond salvation. Jackson worked with grim determination, his movements efficient despite his exhaustion and the smoke inhalation. It seemed like hours, but was likely only 40 minutes before they heard the welcome sound of sirens. The volunteer fire department from Riverdale arrived, quickly taking over the firefighting efforts. By then, the equipment barn was largely destroyed, though they had managed to prevent the fire from spreading to nearby structures. As paramedics checked Jackson for smoke inhalation and burns, Sheriff Danvers approached, his expression grave. "Found fresh tire tracks by the creek access," he reported. "Looks like the Delaney's had friends we didn't know about. I've got deputies looking for them now." Jackson nodded wearily, accepting an oxygen mask from the paramedic. "Doesn't matter now. Damage is done." Sarah, who had been talking with one of the firefighters, joined them. Despite her injured arm and the evening's exertion, she appeared remarkably composed, though her clothes were soaked and smudged with soot. "The fire chief says the barn is a total loss," she reported. "But they think you saved the most valuable equipment by getting it out when you did." Jackson removed the oxygen mask momentarily. "Not sure it matters much now. Without the barn to house it, and with the tractor gone," he trailed off, the cumulative weight of the day's disasters settling heavily on his shoulders. First the bank, then the Delaney's. Now the fire. It seemed the universe was determined to drive him from his land by any means necessary. As the firefighters continued to douse hot spots and the paramedics packed up their equipment, Jackson stood at the edge of what had been his equipment barn, now a smoldering ruin. The irrigation controls he'd rescued sat on the ground nearby, saved but homeless, much like their owner would soon be. Sarah stood beside him in silent solidarity, understanding that no words could adequately address the magnitude of the loss. The moon continued its journey across the star-filled Missouri sky, indifferent to the human drama unfolding beneath it, just as it had witnessed countless disasters and triumphs on this land over generations. "I'll do the interview," Jackson said suddenly, his voice rough from smoke and emotion. "For your book, if my family's story ends with me, at least there should be a record of what was—" Sarah turned to him, surprise and gratitude in her expression. "Thank you. I promise to do it justice." Jackson nodded, his gaze still fixed on the ruined barn. "Come back tomorrow. There's something I want to show you first. Something that might change the story you're writing." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Sheriff Danvers approached again. "Jackson, we can post a deputy overnight if you're concerned about more trouble." Jackson shook his head. "Not necessary. Tom, don't think there's much left to burn or steal at this point." As the emergency vehicles departed and quiet returned to Harmon Ridge Farm, Jackson faced the daunting prospect of salvaging what remained of his livelihood. The foreclosure clock continued to tick, now complicated by the loss of essential equipment and storage. Yet as he watched Sarah drive away with a promise to return the next day, something stirred within him that he hadn't felt in years, a seed of possibility. Not quite hope, but perhaps its precursor. His story wasn't finished yet, and for the first time in a long while, someone was interested enough to listen. Jackson turned toward his farmhouse, the structure that had sheltered 5 generations of Harmons, including his own son, who had turned his back on this heritage. What would Michael think if he could see the farm now, teetering on the edge of oblivion? Would he care? Would he understand what was being lost? These questions followed Jackson inside as he cleaned the soot from his skin and collapsed into bed, exhaustion claiming him before he could dwell further on what the morning might bring. His last conscious thought was of Sarah Mitchell, the unlikely presence who had entered his life through disaster, but who might, through some twist of fate, help him preserve what mattered most, not the land itself, perhaps, but the story it contained. The natural spring still flows beneath the ancient oak, as it has for over 100 years. Its waters, hidden from outsiders but never from those who truly know this land, continue to nourish what matters most, not just crops, but memory, legacy, and the stubborn hope that refuses to be foreclosed. Jackson Harmon stands at the edge of his fields, watching the evening light paint everything in gold. Behind him, the charred remains of the equipment barn serve as a reminder of how quickly the work of generations can be reduced to ash. Yet beside him stands a woman whose words might preserve what flames and banks cannot destroy. Two strangers brought together by disaster now face the setting sun as reluctant allies. One carries the wisdom of soil and seasons in hands too proud to surrender. The other holds the power to ensure that even if the land changes hands, its story will not be forgotten. Sometimes rescue comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes salvation isn't about keeping what you have, but ensuring what you know doesn't die with you. And sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't the land itself, but the courage to fight for what it represents, a way of life, vanishing like mist over morning fields, yet worth preserving in hearts that still remember what matters. What would you fight to save, even after everyone else called it a lost cause?